When should you say no to a client? Well, if you're a hypnotist, a psychotherapist, a coach of any kind, and a client considers hiring you, there is a real question to ask here, isn't there, Mike? Should you work with the person?
At all. Because there are certain risks. Well, what can the risks be? Well, first of all, look at the obvious one. What if it doesn't work? The person's not ready to change. They're just sort of testing the waters, and you work with them anyway, and suddenly it doesn't work, and guess what? They're asking you for a refund.
Right. The last thing you want to do is have work that has refund written all over it, as we say. And of course, by the way, we're going to give you some tips throughout this video towards, well, the back half, which it's not going to be a long video, on how to actually determine whether you should take a client or not.
At all.
So if you don't want them asking for a refund, you also don't want it affecting your reputation or your confidence, right?
Confidence. That would be horrible, because if you have clients and you're seeing them regularly and you go through a cascade of things that aren't working and it builds on, your confidence is going to drop.
Right. And then all of a sudden you're going to be sitting there going, gee, is this field really right for me? And the reality is maybe you just didn't have good client selection practices. Also, there's an issue of, will you feel good about yourself? What if you take the client's money thinking you can help them? You can't because you did poor client selection. Then you kind of feel
you should have known better.
You should have known better.
Right. Because if it doesn't work and you take their money, that's bad. And if it doesn't work and you don't take their money, that is bad too.
Right.
So should you work with a client in the first place? How are we going to determine that?
Well, we're going to talk about threshold briefly. We have another separate video on the concept of threshold. We'll address it really quick here, and then we'll move on to how do you actually know if the client's at threshold. So, quick addition, what the heck's threshold?
3 points. The client has to be able to congruently say, something has to change. That something is me, and that something is now. And the order doesn't really matter. But those are the key points that show that they're ready.
Something's got to change. It's got to be me, and it's got to be now. So, how do you know if you're the hypnotherapist and you're aware? We've taught this for so long. Clients must be at threshold. So people will say, well, how do I know if they're at threshold?
ABC. We teach our students always be calibrating, always picking up the subtle and not so subtle signals from the subject themselves.
So how do you know? You calibrate, and you're looking for things like voice, posture, body language, facial expression, breathing. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
The guy comes in, he says, yeah, you know, I'm feeling really energized, and I think I'm
ready to make this change.
Yeah. And that's not congruence. They're not sending that clear message to you.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose if you said, what's your life going to be like after you have completely given up smoking or whatever it is, and they go, and their breathing is all shallow, they're like, yeah, I guess it'll be pretty good. There's some doubt there. So you're calibrating a problem. And with calibration, what's the rule of thumb here?
Well, you're reading the signals because you're starting with a baseline. When you begin talking to them, listening to them, you got a baseline. And when you begin talking about the change and their willingness and readiness to change, you want to make sure that they're going to sound like they're willing and ready to change.
And you're going to improve, I should say, with practice. They're not going to improve.
It gets better with time.
You, as a calibrator of people, are going to get better by doing it more often and by being aware of what went right, what went wrong. You're going to get better at calibrating with practice.
Because we're looking for that congruence. Right. And congruence is one single clear message. There's no mixed messages from them. So you're going to listen to the tone of their voice. Things like, you know, I really want to change. I'm ready to change. You're happy with that, and I would be. But if they're saying, I do, I think we hear incongruence all the time.
Yeah.
And we recognize it all the time. The
100%.
key is to notice with a client.
Okay, so let's go through a few, we'll call these pro tips.
Yes.
The first one is, when is the best time to actually determine whether someone's at threshold, and that is a discovery call. And
now, what is that?
Yeah, discovery call is a term that's been more popular over the last few years, I think since pandemic and everything's shifting to Zoom. But the same thing could be a discovery meeting in your office if you happen to offer that. Most people do discovery calls, either on the phone, on Zoom, before they actually see the client for the change session, even if it's in a physical office location.
For sure, yeah.
So that is your chance to not only figure out if this client situation is a good fit for you, but to pre-sell them on the idea of what the change will be like and working with you and sell them on the package of sessions if you're doing that.
And to sell you on the fact that they are committed to leading the change themselves.
Right, which is what we're talking about here. We're not really speaking about how to sell the client on your services in this video. We're talking about how can you make sure that you are sold with working on them. And the best time to do that is when you have them, not an intake form where you can't calibrate them in that session where they're filling in check boxes and writing writing in some text. That's fine before the actual discovery call, but you need them in front of you so you can watch what's going on. So what are the things, that you can do here?
Let's touch your point there. The discovery call, the key is, the reason to do it during your first contact with them is that's the best time to see if they even fit in the funnel of making that change. Why would you want them in your office and you're working through the session and then go, boy, this person's not congruent?
Exactly. And that's, so getting to what are we going to do in this discovery call, we're going to find out what are their reasons for wanting to change. We're going to just simply ask them, what are your reasons that you want to make this change? Why now? What other questions might we ask?
Well, anything. I would ask anything that's going to cast doubt on it. Like, oh, you don't really seem energized about this change, or you're making me wonder if you're really ready. By doubting them, it insists that they have to convince you. Your behavior is making them be the one who has to sell you on the whole point, which is ideal. So they give you all their reasons they want to change, and it's a good idea to actually express some degree of doubt to them. Like, yeah, like, you don't really sound like you're ready now, or something like...
And it could be playful.
It could be. Yeah. Like, oh, you're sure you want to quit smoking? Like, you're looking at that pack of cigarettes through the entire meeting.
Because you're looking for material to calibrate against.
That's right. So you insist that they convince you. You don't say, you must convince me, but by throwing doubts into the conversation, it causes them to take the onus of convincing you they're ready to change. And that's a great place for them to be.
100%. Next point we want to talk about is money. Obviously, you want to make sure that they are willing to invest. Are you willing to invest in making this change? Now, if that's a no, and by the way, that's something you could ask in an intake form before you have a meeting with them, but you should still reinforce that in a meeting. Are you willing to invest in yourself? If you get anything other than a hell yes to that question, it's a no. You don't take the client. Does that make sense?
Well, it makes sense to me.
All right. So,
especially if they're Texans. Hell yeah.
There we go. If you don't get a hell yeah, it's a hell no. Bounce them out. They're not ready.
And it's a hell of a waste of time. But what about the whole thing with money as well? Some hypnotists and therapists do a thing which I think is very clever. They actually charge a pittance, 20, 30 bucks, even for the discovery call. And that is going to phase out a lot of people, or weed out a lot of people who aren't appropriate right away.
100%. So if somebody is willing to spend a few dollars, like you said, $20 or $30, that indicates that they are much more serious than someone who has spent no money. Even spending $1 on something means they are a customer versus a lead or a possible customer.
Right.
There's a difference between being an actual customer and being a maybe customer.
Potential customer. Right.
So there's that. Let's talk about another idea is when it comes to smoking cessation, one of the strategies, and this comes back to the idea of calibration and congruence, is to tell the client, wonderful, so you're ready, we're going to book you in for such and such a date, and here are your instructions. You are not to smoke until the time of our appointment, 2 p.m. on Monday, whatever it is.
Yes.
And if you, what happens now? So
well, by making the appointment late in the day, it makes them go all morning without one, and they're committed to this. They can bring a fresh pack with them. That's how I managed it. You say you can have one at the end of the session if you want one. Well, they won't want one. But by waiting, it makes them really climbing the walls, really antsy, and you've got a great way to leverage this now.
Right.
Leverage it.
Now, at the point of the discovery call, when you're booking them in, when you disclose this to them,
and they go,
that's when you're looking for. If they say, okay, no problem, yeah, I can do that, you're good to go. If they go, I can't have one and before the meeting?
Not ready.
Yeah, that's a problem, right? So you need to dig a little bit deeper.
Excellent.
Another thing that you can do is during the questioning, you can say, how ready are you to make this change on a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 10 or whatever? Now, anything other than, say, an 8+, that's not a serious person. We had one student in our academy that said the client wanted to quit smoking and then reported, well, to answer that question, how ready are you to make that change? How willing are you to make that change? They were only a 3. So the hypnotist was smart and said, you're not ready yet. Come back when you're really ready.
And what you said is a good point there. Ready rather than willing, I think, is probably the stronger word to use.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, so that's making sure they're ready, making sure that you're asking questions that validate congruently and calibrating that they are ready to make that change. Another one is about guarantees. Yeah. So you might have a client that says, well, do you offer a guarantee? Now, what are your thoughts on that?
I never offered a guarantee because people were not paying me for a specific result. They were paying for my time and expertise.
Right.
And that's how it would be spelled out in the intake form.
And I would never recommend offering a money-back guarantee. So if you are going to offer a guarantee, think of it the way Mike described. You're selling your time and your expertise and your commitment commitment to them. So I have seen people do things like, I guarantee that I will continue to work with you through your process of making that change, your process of making the change. Now, if a person isn't making the change and realizes they weren't quite ready or serious, they'll stop coming to you, but you're not offering a money-back guarantee because that means they're not willing to commit to investing in themselves and being responsible for the change.
Exactly. Remember, they're the ones who change, not you. They have to take control. They have to have the onus of change on them, and you're there to help them.
Right. Okay, so the bottom line here is that you need to make sure that not only is the client willing to change, willing to invest in the change, and that the change has got to be me, got to be change, got to be now. But that you also feel confident that you can help them make that change. Now, how does somebody get confident to help people make change, Mike?
Good question, Chris. You study and train in hypnosis at a really good school.
Oh,
good reputable source.
I wonder where that might be. How about the Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy? We'll put a link in the description underneath this video. You can check it out. It's free to get started. It's an awesome experience. Our students love it. You're going to love it too. Learn how to help people and how to change their lives.
Right on.
All right.
Thanks again.
We'll see you in the next video. And good night.